Welcome and good morning, everyone. You are in the um, Southeastern Conference session, Do Black Lives Really Matter? If you haven't already muted yourself, I ask you to mute yourself so we don't have any interference with our speaker. Today we have with us Reverend Dr. Velda R. Love. She serves as Minister for Racial Justice in the Justice and Local Church Ministries of the UCC. Reverend Love develops resources in an effort to equip UCC congregations to be on a restorative racial justice journey in order to dismantle and eradicate structural, systemic, and individual racism. This includes writing curriculum, resources, and providing training opportunities. We're very pleased and delighted to have you with us today, Reverend Love, and looking forward to our time together. And I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rhoda. I'm gonna put my glasses on so I can pretend like I can see. There you are. Good morning. It's good to be with you and that you have made a decision to be part of this workshop this morning. I understand it is your annual meeting and you have taken time to engage in this conversation. As my descriptive indicates, I am on national staff at the United Church of Christ as the Minister for Racial Justice. And this opportunity to be with you is just a culmination of the work that I've been doing pretty much all of my life, but in my professional life, spending 16 years in higher education. So I name myself, identify myself as an educator, and spending the majority of my time in the Black church in Chicago, being baptized as a Baptist child, and then being part of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago with Reverend Dr. Jeremiah A. Wright Jr. for over 20 years. That local church experience was all about forming my identity as a woman of African descent. The work that I do allows me to self-identify so that I am not caught in colonial settler narratives or definitions about who I am or my people group, people of African descent. And so though that way I'm studying African-centered pedagogy or learning, the work is also impacted by being part of a congregation that looked at spirituality and the Bible from those collective voices on the continent. And this morning we'll watch a few videos and we will engage in some conversation, but that is how I self-identify. I'm also the developer of the curriculum Sacred Conversations to End Racism. And I've trained over 40 certified trainers. That comes also out of a community learning and ways in which we understand that all lives are part of God's design, but we will today talk about those first humans. Also wanting to invite you, as you are sitting and looking at me and I am looking at you, to take notes. Again, I'm an educator. And as you're taking notes, if we have an opportunity to be in a small group, that way you all can engage in some conversation in a breakout room. So first, before we begin, that is who I am. I will use terms like people of European descent, Native, Asian, and African descent. This also allows all of us to go back. That bird behind me is a Sankofa bird from Ghana, and that's the Akan people. Kofa means to go back and to get your own history. And I invite those of European descent to dig into your own history, who your immigrant ancestors are, because we occupy land that was stewarded and taken care of by Native North American tribes and clans and families long before Europe decided it was going to invade and colonize and take the land. And that invasion also allows us to go back and get our history, who those ancestors were in your own lineage, people of European descent, and then when this construction of whiteness takes over, because you have an immigrant background. And so that is the invitation in community to have these honest conversations. And so these are some things that we'll be talking about today. It is Juneteenth, and we know that President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris have signed into law Juneteenth as a federal holiday. And what that means for those Texans in 1865 to learn 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation signed into law by President Lincoln that they were no longer to be enslaved. That is also language that is helpful for us to understand why Black Lives Matter. Because my ancestors, I am 5th generation on this continent in the United States. And my ancestors came as enslaved people, not slaves, which means when they left the continent, their ancestors before them were free. And God did not create slaves, nor did God create a dominant culture, a dominant history, a dominant narrative. And there's no such thing as a dominant people group. And so we're going to lean into the ways in which we understand humanity, God's intention, and that Black lives really matter. Then we also have to change the ways that we practice our behavior in this moment around what it means to be a person of African descent. So I'm going to ask this question: who has been part of a workshop with me before? I see one familiar face. All right. Okay, so this will be a repeat for you. Some of this will be new for others. And so I'm just gonna ask you to lean in. That's Charmaine Penn Johnson, who has been part of a workshop with me before. So I also want to ask to invite you to just relax, settle in, and I want to just get the temperature of this moment. Many of you probably got up very early. You may be across the country. Your time zones may be different. And so what I mean by temperature is how you're feeling. Just name your temperature, not in degrees, but cloudy, sunny, partly cloudy, rainy, misty, or just not sure. And so I'll begin. I am in North Ridgeville, Ohio, a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. It has rained, and so, but I am feeling sunny despite the rain. I invite Charmaine.
I am also feeling sunny, despite the despite the projected forecast in our way.
Thank you. Charmaine, invite someone else in.
I invite Mariana because I think Mariana was in the process of speaking.
Okay.
I think that was actually my kid saying hey to everybody.
All right, so if Mariana is just entering, for those who are just entering, we are just naming our weather condition inside of our bodies. And Charmaine has said that she is sunny despite the weather conditions. And so let's see, I'll pick, and then once I pick another person, you will go ahead and pick someone else on the screen. Catherine.
Good morning. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and it is overcast here, but I'm feeling partly sunny.
Thank you. If you could invite someone in the space to speak, that would be great.
Sorry, 1 cup of coffee in. I'll invite Jean Norton.
I am in Nashville, Tennessee, where it is sunny today and there's a gentle breeze, and I am sunny today. And I will invite Marvin Morgan.
Thank you. I'm serving in Charlottesville, Virginia, the Sojourners UCC, and I'm visiting my family in Atlanta, and just the sight of my family makes my day sunny. And I'd like to call on Joyce Myers Brown, whom I haven't seen in a while.
Good morning, Marvin, dear old friend. I'm here in Atlanta. It's going to be very, very stormy later, but I am stormy inside because I've got to leave this workshop before it's over to go to a memorial service at our church. One of our dearest members died. This will be our first time physically in the church, and it'll be a celebration, but a sorrow. Oh, and I will pass to Dorothy, another old timer.
I'm in Nashville and had a wonderful time sitting on my patio, not being in the sun, but watching the sun come up. And so I'm feeling sunny. And I will call on Mariana.
I'm in Columbia, South Carolina, and it is blazing hot as usual in summer. And but I'm feeling very refreshed after our first session this morning and excited too. Oh, and I will call on, I don't know if some of these people have already gone, but Jennifer Baker, have you gone?
No, I haven't. I am in Cairo, Georgia, and it is raining cats and dogs, but I'm feeling pretty sunny.
So Jennifer muted her. That's okay. Sonia, go ahead.
Good morning. I am Sonia Williams. I am in Stockbridge, Georgia at the moment, and I'm feeling very sunny.
Excellent. Thank you. Susanna?
I'm Susanna Davis. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and it is cloudy and but I am feeling pretty sunny and thankful to be with y'all today. And I'll call on B.
All right, I had to unmute. We're in the storm right now. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama. It is dark as night outside right now. So I greet you, but I'm sunny, sunny, sunny inside. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Beatrice. So Beatrice, I'm going to go ahead and call on D. Houston Hall.
Thank you.
I'm in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm an intentional interim at number 8. And my last session was really good. And I'm looking forward to this one. And so let me pick Gregory Lewis. I don't think he's been called. Maybe he's left.
Okay, let's go.
How
ahead.
about
Dale?
Hi, I'm in Cookeville, Tennessee, and you might see the sun coming in through the window here. It's a beautiful day here. I just went out for a short walk in between the sessions. I'm sunny, and how can I not be whenever we get together with the Southeast Conference?
Thank you, Dale. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Holiday in Marietta, Georgia, and I'm partly cloudy because my dogs are already nervous about the storm that's coming in. And they're making me nervous about it now, too.
Thank you. And I see Danielle.
Hi, My name is Danielle Elliott, and I am from Clemson, South Carolina. And we will be getting that storm overnight, so it's a little cloudy here. But I am feeling very sunny inside. I'm also a teacher and finished up my school year yesterday. So I have a couple months of summer to look forward to. So that is a time to be sunny. And let's see, I'm trying to remember who hasn't gone. I will call on Lisa. I'm not sure if you've gone or not. I'm sorry if you have.
No, I have not. I'm trying to figure out how to do this picture. Oh, good morning. I am like B. I'm in Montgomery, Alabama, so it's pretty dark and cloudy outside, and it's pouring down raining. I had a problem getting in this morning, so I'm just joining everybody.
Thank you. We're just asking for how you're feeling in terms of the temperature or the weather. How are you feeling in terms of the weather?
Pretty gloomy.
Pretty gloomy. Okay. Thank you, Lisa. And I don't know if Barbara Myers has gone, and then I think we're done.
No, I haven't. And I would say I'm partly cloudy today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so one of the ways in which we
Can I enter?
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Is that Patricia?
I'm sorry. It is. It's Patty. Only my mother called me that when she was really mad. I am Sunny. I am from Maine. I'm in Glacier National Park. And I am extremely sunny first workshop and being at the Southeast Conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. So I believe we have everyone. So in ways in which we take our temperature, this allows us to be in our feelings as opposed to in our heads. When I'm doing this work, I'm asking people, how do you feel about what you've seen and what you heard? If we're going to talk about, do Black lives really matter? So just this week, as we have moved into, and thank you everyone for identifying your condition of temperature and weather. I'm just going to read a few things from the EJI calendar, the Equal Justice Initiative calendar. I don't know how many of you all subscribe and get that in and have that in your home. But just this week, if we're going to be talking about, do Black lives really matter? And we know that Juneteenth was Freedom Emancipation Day for those Texans. I'm going to start with the 13th, which is the Sabbath day, a Sunday. And this moves through the centuries, I should say. And so I'm going to start with the 13th of June, which was 2005. On the calendar, it says U.S. Congress formally apologizes for its failure to pass any of the 200 anti-lynching bills introduced from 1882 to 1968. On June 14th, 1973, two young Black girls, 14 years old, Minnie and 12-year-old Mary Alice Ralph, are sterilized at a health clinic in Montgomery, Alabama, without their knowledge or consent. On June 15th, 1920, three Black circus workers are accused of raping a white woman and lynched by a mob of 10,000 in Duluth, Minnesota. On June 16, 1944, South Carolina electrocutes George Stinney Jr., a 90-pound Black 14-year-old, after he is falsely accused of rape and murder. He is the youngest person executed in the 20th century in America. On June 17th, 1958 in California, 14 Mexican migrant workers die in a burning bus. In 1971, President Richard Nixon declares war on drugs, contributing to 700%, a 700% increase in US prison population by 2007. And on June 18th, in 2015, in Charleston, South Carolina, white teen who embraced racist ideology and wanted to start a race war is arrested for shooting 9 Black people attending a Bible study at Mother Emanuel AME Church. And on this day, June 19th, in 1865, months after the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, enslaved Black people in Texas finally learn about their freedom when Union troops arrive and tell them the Confederacy lost the Civil War. This is not just Black history, this is our collective history. And the more that we have a grasp on our collective history, the more we can understand in this moment, in the 21st century, in 2021, why an uprising would happen after the murder of George Floyd, and why not 24 hours after the conviction of police officer Derek Chauvin, there is another murder committed, a state-sanctioned violent murder in Columbus, Ohio. And it continues. And so I'm going to ask you to put on your radar how you feel, what you felt. And the question is why? Why haven't Black Lives Mattered? I'm going to share my screen and we'll begin to have some interactive videos and we'll come back. I'm going to make sure I time myself so that I don't run over, so that we have time for conversation. Okay, that is not cooperating. There we go. Excellent. And just a thumbs up, everyone can see this? Excellent, thank you. And so this particular PowerPoint that I'll be sharing with you is called Confronting Racism in a Complicit World. I usually start this way. And again, this also helps us understand the question, do Black lives really matter? And so I use this text, for God so loved the world, out of John 3:16. And as people of faith, and I don't use the term intentionally Christian because it is generally that word is can be elusive or a trigger for those who are Christian and yet recognize that Christians are responsible for many of the heinous crimes across the globe. But we also want to be aware of how we practice our Christian identity or our Christianity. And so this rock that we live on is 4.54 billion years old, and modern humans are about 200,000 years old. And so when we began to think about the good creation that is this globe, this earth, humans are not the center of its design. 4.5 billion years versus 200,000 years. And so in this moment, the world's population is 84% people of non-European descent. And it has always been people of non-European descent that have been the largest population of the world. And yet, people of European descent, through the decree of the doctrine of discovery and the rise of capitalism in England and in Spain, and those monarchies began to run out of their resources and declare themselves. It was first in the Anglo-Saxon German identity that they were superior. And so then they use this particular myth to use that particular language as exceptionalism, which also moves with those immigrants as they leave their countries in the 15, 16, 17, 1800s and occupy land that belonged to indigenous people. And so when we began to understand this construction of whiteness, we also have to unpack the ways in which other people groups understand their history. And so I use the power of Sankofa to know your history. Because if you don't know your history or your family lineage or who your ancestors are, you live into a false narrative of whiteness. And then you also live into a false narrative of the stereotypes that were created that are also global for people of African descent. And so this Akan word is important for my own identity and for the people that are in a collective communal learning space to go back and to get our history. And so it is this pivotal moment in May 20th on 2020, when there seems to be this surge of recognition that racism still exists. So I've been with the United Church of Christ for the last 4 years. I've been doing this work. But after May 20th, my email, my phone, everything exploded because people witnessed a lynching on the ground. And for those who said, I thought we were past this, or I marched in the 60s, or I really followed MLK, or I didn't know this was still happening. And that feels in my body like a sense of denial when it is constantly perpetuated as part of the visuals that we see or read daily. But this is the moment that created another uprising and crisis in our nation, but not just our nation, around the globe. And so this particular phrase, no justice, no peace, is also a part of how we understand liberation for those who have been oppressed for over 500 years. And this is both a Black Lives Matter, or the movement for Black life, but also for Native American folk who've experienced genocide, as well as those who experience oppression or racism in this country and around the globe.
From Brazil to Iran, thousands have gathered to show solidarity with U.S. protests over the killing of George Floyd. He died after a Minneapolis cop kneeled on his neck for nearly 9 minutes. The worldwide events echoed peaceful messages in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. In South America, hundreds of protesters came together outside Rio de Janeiro's state government building on May 31st. They demanded an end to police brutality against Black people within Rio's working-class neighborhoods, known as favelas. Iranians held a small demonstration outside the Swiss embassy. 2 Syrian artists painted a mural in memory of Floyd in war-torn Idlib. And in Israel, a group gathered to protest the killing of Iyad al-Halak, an autistic Palestinian man, as well as Floyd. In London, demonstrators marched through the city and around the U.S. Embassy, defying the UK's coronavirus restrictions that prohibit mass gatherings. Protesters kneeled in unison, chanting, "No justice, no peace," in Trafalgar Square. George Floyd! While the protests have mostly been peaceful, there have been some clashes with the police. And statues of slave traders were torn down across England. Protesters threw the statue of slave trader Edward Colston into the harbor on Sunday. In Belgium, city officials removed the statue of colonial King Leopold II. This came after protesters vandalized and torched the statue. Protests against police brutality also formed throughout Berlin. Demonstrators gathered around the U.S. Embassy chanting.
Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black lives matter! Black
In Italy, Black Lives Matter protesters surrounded the U.S. consulate. The country is only beginning to ease lockdown, so they appear to be social distancing. Across France, more than 23,000 protesters took to the streets. Demonstrators in Paris kneeled in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds in homage to Floyd. In Ireland, over 150 protesters gathered with signs reading "The world is watching" on June 1st. They gathered again the next day outside of the U.S. Embassy.
We're here about the injustice of Black lives being lost every day at the hands of the police authority in the United States, and not only in the United States. Racism is a global issue.
Protesters also called for an end to racism in Canada, where a recent police killing of a Black man and another death currently under investigation have inflamed tensions. These protests merged with calls for solidarity with U.S. demonstrators rallying against Floyd's death. In New Zealand, around 4,000 protesters took to the streets of Auckland for rallies and vigils on June 1st. Crowds gathered outside the U.S. consulate. In Australia, protesters called out systemic racism as well as Aboriginal deaths in police custody in their own country. Protests demanding justice and an end to racist policing are expected to continue this week.
And so as you've watched this video and as it landed in your body, I would ask that you would just write some responses on what you've seen, what you heard, and what you felt. Because the world is watching the US, as well as this is a global issue. It has always been a global issue, but again, uprising after uprising, there continues to be this violence against people of African descent globally, the diaspora as we call them, because we know that European enslavers transported Black people, kidnapped and trafficked Black people across both the continent, into Europe, into India, and across South America, Central America, and in North America. And so when we heard those cities and being named in those countries, Syria, Iran, or Iranians, Palestinians in Israel, folks in London, in the UK, in Belgium, in Berlin, in Milan, Italy, in France, in Ireland, in New Zealand, in Auckland, and Australia. And so if those groups of people in uprising in those countries, in those cities, understand that Black lives matter, the question for us is, why are we so silent as people of faith around this issue? And so part of the question is, how did we get here? How did we get here? And this is also part of the going back to get your history, so that even in your faith community, your local church, your conference, you are beginning to dig in and ask about the policies that created how we got here. The elected officials, perhaps, that people in your family or you may have supported that have been absolutely opposed to the equity and the inclusion of people of African descent, people in Black communities. And so this question, how did we get here, and do Black lives really matter? It asks us to dismantle the colonial narrative, that we are repositioning as people of faith, humanity, and we are reconstructing language that is more inclusive and equitable, and that we are reframing God's image from male to spirit. And so in many circles that I have done teaching and workshops in, and so people refer to God as He. God is not a he, God is spirit. And God is not a white male. Many people within the white nationalist and supremacy network want to identify this land as theirs, and that God is white and God is on their side, and God really loves that AK-47 and those guns that are violent against Black and brown bodies. So how did we get here? And you're here today because I'm assuming, I never want to be clear about anything, but I'm assuming that you are wanting to put the elephant in the room, this conversation around racism, not race, because race is the construction that has created racism. And we can see it. And so I'm inviting you as a community in the Southeast Conference to make sure that you are aware that this can be seen. We are not absent of its visual. And do Black lives really matter? And so when we begin to understand or ask this question internally, we have to also look at these systems which hold people hostage and oppressed. And I ask everyone to please mute. And so the policies and systems that were created through the doctrine of discovery and the policies that were created in this country were never intended to free the enslaved Black body. Never. And so the system and the policies and the laws that were created, and there's a really good book, Shades of Freedom, by Leon Higginbotham, who was an attorney, and his daughter is very much involved in the movement as well as the National Museum, Smithsonian Museum in DC. But he details every law that comes forth from a president or a legislature or a state that made sure, as today, that people are disenfranchised, that they cannot vote, that they cannot move freely, that environmental racism is in communities of color. The system is designed to protect whiteness. And so how does that feel when we understand that? And so we look at some of the ways in which, and I share this with you because it's important also to understand, let's see, I can't get at it from there, the Black past. And so I would invite you, I'm going to share this link with you before you depart. I'll put it in the chat, and you can go back and look at racial violence in the United States from 1660 until 2021. I think this particular document stops in 2016, but it is looking at the uprisings of those enslaved persons, their revolt, their resistance, their opposition to being held in bondage. And then the backlash that comes from white communities that create the violence in Tulsa, in Wilmington, in New York, in Duluth, across the country. There is no state that did not have an opportunity to lynch, to kill, to violate, or to create the violence. Okay. And so this is helpful for us if you are familiar, have been to the museum in Montgomery, Alabama, or you're familiar with Brian Stevenson, the reality that Black lives didn't matter, but do matter, absolutely do matter, can be witnessed through this video. Oops.
We have been practicing silence about our history for a very long time. In this country, we don't talk about slavery, we don't talk about lynching, we don't talk about segregation. We have a hard time talking about race, and it has burdened us. We don't think it's odd that we don't talk about this history
We actually think it's odd when somebody tries to talk about it. If we react to the effort of trying to talk about it as if that's the threat, not our continued silence. We're doing a lot of damage to each succeeding generation. It's the 21st century, and there's still a presumption of dangerousness and guilt that gets assigned to Black and brown people in this country. We haven't created spaces in America that deal honestly with the legacy of slavery. You know, my view is that the great evil of American slavery wasn't involuntary servitude and forced labor. It was the narrative of racial difference that we created to justify it. We said Black people are different than white people. They can't do this, they can't do that. The Supreme Court said they're 3/5 human. And this ideology of white supremacy, that narrative of racial difference, that was the true evil. So for me, slavery doesn't end in 1865, it just evolves. It turns into decades where we have terrorism and lynching, and our courts and our systems of government tolerated Black people being pulled out of their homes and hung from trees, sometimes on the courthouse lawn. The legal system, the rule of law was complicit. The Black people in Boston, the Black people in Cleveland and Chicago and Detroit and Los Angeles and Oakland didn't go to those communities as immigrants looking for new economic opportunities. They went there as refugees and exiles from terror in the American South. And then we lived through this period of civil rights struggle that had some success, but it didn't ultimately confront that narrative of racial difference. And so now we have a system of criminal justice administration that is very racialized, where we tolerate bias and inequality. We started out as an organization trying to provide legal services to people on death row. We had a large number of people sentenced to death in the state of Alabama. It's a state that doesn't have a public defender system. And so many people on death row can't find the legal help they need. And so we started this project in Alabama because there was a desperate need for that. And our work has now led me back to thinking about race. What we want to do is to create spaces that expose people to the history of slavery and lynching and segregation so that at the end of it, you are motivated to say, never again. And then we're going to ask people, what does that mean? Does it mean that we should be tolerating some of the things that we tolerate? Does it mean we should be reacting differently when there's evidence of police misconduct or violence directed at some unarmed person of color? Does it mean we should react differently if a politician starts talking about demonizing a particular group of people because of their ethnicity or their religion? If we can do that, then the legal work we're trying to do, the reform work we're trying to do, just becomes a lot more achievable. I insist that we stay hopeful because I don't think we can do anything we need to do without that. And we have to get comfortable doing the uncomfortable because as much as we'd like to believe it's not true, justice never comes when you only do what's comfortable and convenient. Change never comes, oppression never ends, equality never prevails. You have to be willing to raise the issues, to challenge the systems that don't educate people about the history honestly. We can't recover from this history that burdens us until we deal with it. It's a legal struggle, it's a narrative struggle, it's a hope struggle, because the other thing that has to happen in a society like ours is that you actually have to believe things you haven't seen. That's a necessary condition. In fact, I actually believe that hopelessness is the enemy of justice, because injustice prevails where hopelessness persists. And you're either hopeful or you're the problem. There's really no middle ground. For me, that's what the law has to facilitate, the ability to get beyond where we've been to someplace better.
So please write your responses to Brian Stevenson. We're going to move so that we can be engaged in some conversation. And I want us to look at, we're going to move beyond this. This is, we're going to not do that one. Not going to do that one. We are going to list. So I want us to move what we have. This is a movement. I'm always about movement, but I don't want to overwhelm you. And so our time is running short as well. But I want us to now think about the space in which we inhabit in our local church or a conference or our association, and the ways in which this myth of whiteness has permeated the church, the American church. And this is just a trailer. You can find this documentary on Amazon.com. It's free if you have a Prime subscription. And you can also find it, I'm blanking on, I have the DVD. I'll find it so that I can make sure Spark House has the DVD, and you can go online and purchase it.
Why did you select Levittown to live?
We were looking for a place to buy a home. We looked at Levittown, and we liked the homes here. We liked the advantages that Levittown seemed to offer in comparison to other cities. And we understood that it was going to be all white, and we were very happy to buy a home here.
This has always been who America is. The dissolution of the American exceptionalism dream.
There are a lot of people who believe that racism is there, it's always going to be there, there's nothing you can do about it. And I say no, this is something we made up.
There is no concept of race in the Bible because race is a thoroughly modern construction.
Everything about the history of Christianity has been built around whiteness.
When we focus on what makes us, quote, the same, it denies the fact that our lives are not the same. And we live in different worlds with different realities.
The truth is, there's no organized effort to harm black people by white people. That doesn't exist here.
I think what we have done with race is evil.
When you're the minority, that means that everything of yours is lost.
Your family traditions are gone. Your cultural traditions are gone. Your pride is gone.
Someone will say, I seriously thought that the Native people had all died out, that there were no Native people anymore.
We have to let go of what we believe we know. We have to let go.
We're just kind of playing the games of faith here. We're just pretending that things are okay when they're really not.
Whiteness is going to create whiteness. And white supremacy, once it's embedded in the culture and in the culture of a church, it doesn't give you the tools to dismantle itself.
Those are our learning tools for this morning. What I want to do is to put you in small groups for a few minutes just to respond to what you've seen, what you heard, and how you feel. And so I want to backtrack a little bit just to refresh our memory. And so in that last video, Jim Bear Jacobs and Curtis DeYoung are part of the Reparatory Justice and Reparations Working Group that I am creating for the United Church of Christ for local churches. And this will address a lot of the issues that you have heard today, but it is also a strategy and a space for online learning What is reparations, and why should we, people of faith, repair not only the church, but the nation needs to be repaired? And what if the United Church of Christ led that movement? And so I'm also going to be starting a campaign with Reverend Tracy Blackman on Join the Movement Towards Racial Justice. And that will highlight at General Synod, and then the Reparatory Justice and Reparations, which was a webinar about 2 weeks ago, will launch in February 2022. This work is important. It's my passion. Not everybody can do anti-racism work, but I've been called to this, and it's a heavy load. And so again, those 43 facilitators that have been trained and as part of this journey are also doing this in respective places. It's not perfect. It's not the only method or tool, but I believe it in this moment as God is speaking to me in all of her wisdom. Yes, I'm gendering God, that there is an opportunity for us to really be the change that the church needs to experience. And so again, the world is watching. This is a global issue. There is an ideology, and if you understand, there's an ideology that gets passed down about what it means to be a person of African or Native or Asian or Indian, Indian in terms of Native American and Central South American descent, as well as South Asian, AAPI, which is Asian American and Pacific Islander. That ideology has allowed itself to be embedded in everything: politics, education, laws, systems, institutions. All of it is structural in our nation. And as Brian Stevenson indicated, we tolerate inequality. We tolerate it, we turn away from it, we ignore it, we pretend it's not there, we deny it, or we figure it's just too big, it's nothing we can do about it. And yet, for the last 500 years, there have been revolts and uprisings and marches and protests. And so for people who feel the oppression on their bodies, in their bodies, have seen and witnessed family members being lynched or killed, there is the opportunity to act and to be activists. Intersectional, all of it. We create space to expose the people who want to hold us hostage. So the question for you and your small group is, what does this mean? What does this mean for us right now, June 19th, Juneteenth, 2021, going back to get this history, living in this moment? What does this mean? And how, I make it personal, how will you respond to the violence? It's not going to end because we have a 90-minute workshop. It's not going to end just being on in a 2-week workshop. It's not going to end. And so I invite people to be on a lifelong journey because we have 500 years of recovery and repair to do. How should we respond? How do we respond to politicians in our county, our city, our state, our country who support racism? Not wanting critical race theory taught in schools is an attack on the very idea that education should just be about white exceptionalism and a false narrative. And so why does the country, or why do those politicians not want us to think more critically and outside the box? And think about how we challenge, as a faith community, the systems, change the narrative, and work for justice. All right, let's see how many of you are here. I'm going to put you in small groups. Let's see. That would be 4 of you. I'm going to recreate it, make the group smaller. All right. We don't want anyone to be in a room by yourself. It'll be 2 to 3 people in a breakout room. So please take these questions, engage one another, come back, and we will talk about some strategies. When you see the open room, please go in, or it may take you there, and I'll come and get you.
Reverend Love, how much time do we have?
You have, it is 11:26. I'm going to come get you at 11:40. So about 10 to 12 minutes, okay? All right. So Rhoda, do you want to stay out, or would you like to go to a room? You'll go to a room, okay. Let me find you. I don't see you. Can you see the open rooms?
Oh, maybe so there. So let's see.
Go to room 4. There are only 2 people there. Can you see it?
Okay. Let's see, how do I?
If you open the breakout rooms at the bottom of your,
Yeah, I did that.
And then go to, you'll see room 4. And it'll say join. It'll say 2, and then hit join.
Oh, I see join. I gotcha. Thank you.
All righty.
Nurses and clerical folks we're vaccinated.
Yeah.
So, okay, I think we're probably coming back.
Now.
Yes,
okay.
We are back. So I know that was not enough time to come up with strategies that will heal the world.
If you haven't done that already, ma'am.
I recognize that. And that is why this is an invitation to be on a lifelong journey, not only just to dismantle racism, but, you know, to look within ourselves, to examine what we have. I call it, I sent a text to a good friend and I was like, oh my God, we've been drinking the Kool-Aid. And it turned out it's their Kook-Aid. So for those of you who did not drink Kool-Aid growing up, so I'm just excited to hear just from some of you before we depart on some of your conversation and how you're feeling, taking the temperature. So I'll take.
Well, I start with one, thank you so much for this effort and for the wisdom that you're offering and the shoulders of the ancestors that you're standing on and recognizing and doing this, inspiring us all to do more. One of the questions that came up at the end of our small group was where to start to learn more. And I know that there are curricula that I use in my work. But if there is a centralized place in the UCC that, you know, we're starting to collect resources so that if people want to do self-study or they want to continue this conversation, they can do that. I'd love to know about it.
Thank you. I couldn't see who was speaking. There are opportunities of engagement. So I do 1 to 2 day workshops, week-long workshops. There's an institute in the fall that's 5 weeks. And then I encourage people to be on a lifelong journey by joining the Sacred Conversations to End Racism Facilitator Training, which starts in January. But there is, I have a plethora of resources. You can't see them all here. They're on the floor, they're in another room, they're in the office at 700 Prospect, but there are a plethora of resources and I can send those. I did put in the chat the link to the article around Our Racist Past. And I will send Rhoda more resources if that's fine for people, and you can send that out to who is present today.
Reverend Love, could you share your email address with us?
I can do that, yes. Any other thoughts, feelings around your conversation?
I wish, this is B. Fornes in Montgomery. I wish everybody could have been in our chat, in our little small room with us, because we had it going on in our chat room. One of the things that I'm going to ask the United Church of Christ, especially the Southeast Conference, when we get to our conference next year, is to, when we come to Montgomery, to take some time off to go out to the museum at night. EJI is just unbelievable. And we discussed this in our conversation, but it's even more so lovely at night to see. And now there's a restaurant out there. So that we'll be able to eat out there and do all of that. And Dr. Love, I want to thank you for showing that piece. I suggested too, that when we come to Montgomery, that we would get Brian Stevens to sign books for us and to be with us and to be a part of us. But that's not what we discussed. This is what I want to bring to all of us. We talked about the youth and how we were so excited to see at the protest, at the peaceful protest, all of the young people out protesting and taking their stand. And it's going to take the children, the youth, it's going to take them to be vibrant and to move us forward in this movement and what we want to achieve, because we're all getting older and we're all seasoned. And if we are going to all be free, and if we're all going to be there together, we're going to have to rely on the youth to get us there. If you notice, more youth hit the streets this time, understanding that what was happening was wrong. It was not right. And we've got to train them and get them ready to train us and to move into a new situation, into a new state of mind, so that we can all get there together. I just was blown away by Charmaine. And I'm just going to say this to you, with us being in our little group and what we accomplished in just that little bit of time, we know that we have much work to do. And just being on, and Jean had such wonderful, she added so much to this, not being a white person, but being Jean today. So I want to say thank you. This was so much needed. We needed this. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. You're welcome.
Just a brief comment before I have to go. Amani, you raised that question earlier that Velda was not able to see. You are relating to the right denomination. The United Church of Christ has resources. They go all the way back when my hair was black, and it's not black anymore, through the Commission for Racial Justice, and now its predecessor body, Justice and Witness Ministry. The United Church of Christ has been on the cutting edge of justice issues since its inception. And I thank God for it. Thank you, Velda.
Thank you, Marvin. Thank you so much. And it has, just lean in. It's work. And I don't want us to think that this is not a heavy load, but we cannot do it by ourselves. We do it in community, and we do it, everyone does it. And it is like the gifts. There's a head, there's a hand, there's a foot, and there are people who have resources. And if you are learning and leaning in, you will learn much from the wisdom as well as young people. I do believe that this generation is not going to be sitting in anybody's pew. They will be church on the streets, in a coffee shop, in wherever, a house church, we're taking it back to the first century. That's where they will be strategizing and planning. And so I encourage us to lean in, don't shy away from the music, their language. If you were part of the Juneteenth yesterday, the language gets pretty raw. And so, we've heard the language before. So, don't step above and think that, it's not new. That's the language of today. So lean in, and I encourage you, and email me if you need resources. Rhoda, I want to stay faithful to the time. I know it's 11:46.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Thank you so much, Reverend Love, for your presentation. We've all got a lot of work to do. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I invite